Hello and welcome once again to the Yards After Catch, the Yak podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. And we're talking about Week 4, some top options, some values, some GPP options, and of course with Antonio Brown being on the Thursday slate and also having Michael Vick throwing him footballs now, or trying to at least, that's going to change things obviously for this week. So there's no debate between the top two guys. Julio Jones has got to be your top option here. You've got him listed here as huge projections once again, and he's got a solid matchup once again against Houston. Vegas total 27. I mean, it's not an ideal matchup, but Julio Jones is going to get volume. He's going to get targets, and I mean, he's a nearly impossible cover for anything but the most elite of defenders. And I mean, you've got some decent corners in Houston. Jonathan Joseph, a pretty good defender, but I mean, size and speed, it's still the Julio Jones show for Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to pass him up this week. Like you mentioned, with Antonio Brown playing on Thursday, he becomes, pretty far and away the top option for me. The only other guy I have even close to him is the next guy we have on this list, which is Randall Cobb. He's quite a bit pricier, which I'd like to say would drive his ownership percentage down, but even with Brown being a great play last week, he was still really heavily owned, and he had an even better game. So it's hard to see Jones being under like 30% in cash games, I would think, and he's probably going to be around that in GPPs too. So, I mean, he's a guy you got to try and work in as much as possible in all formats, and that's the same thing I'm trying to do with Cobb, who's much better priced, but it's hard to play both of them, and I don't know which one. I'm going to have a hard time sitting either one of them, basically, in cash games.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like it's one of those situations where it might be possible this week because a lot of the top running backs in pretty tough spots, and Le'Veon Bell playing Thursday also. So, if you can find value running backs you feel good enough about, I mean, it's possible, but certainly going to have to sacrifice somewhere. But that transitions us over to Randall Cobb, who didn't have a great week 1, but, I mean, has really turned it around. Over 100 yards 2 weeks ago, just under 100 this past week, but caught 3 touchdown passes, so you'll obviously give him a pass for being under the 100-yard mark if you catch a trio of scores. And this is a 49ers secondary that has just looked – I mean, they might be the worst secondary in all of football. They've looked terrible, and each game – I mean, the Giants might have something to say about that, but this has been a defense just gotten shredded through the air, and especially with Devontae Adams now expected to miss some time, I mean, at least this week for sure. Definitely more to go around for Randall Cobb, and good luck with these inexperienced corners trying to slow him down this week.
Yeah, right. I mean, like I mentioned, they're both outrageously good plays in my opinion, and guys that I would love to play in 100% of lineups this week if I can. Yeah. I mean, they have such high floors, obviously really high ceilings as we saw last week. There's just really nothing you can argue about there. I mean, I don't even know if Devontae Adams being out really helps Cobb. I mean, he was clearly the number one option basically all over the field for the Packers. They use him as an extension of the running game sometimes, throwing him short passes. Like I saw, he caught that one touchdown pass on a out route from the slot that was about a 3-yard throw for Rodgers. So, I mean, like, he's just such a consistent target now that he's healthy. I mean, people got down on him a little bit after that week 1 where he struggled a little bit with his shoulder injury. But, I mean, he's an elite play at a sub-elite price now.
Yeah, and I mean, best passing attack in all of football, outside of maybe the Patriots. I mean, I still think it's the best. And like you said, he gets involved. I mean, they run jet sweeps with him every once in a while. The guy does everything, slot, outside. So got to love Randall Cobb this week. And I think if for some reason you can't get Julio Jones, but you save a little bit of money, I don't think that Cobb's a bad alternative either.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, he's definitely the guy that, like, if you're not playing Julio and not playing Randall Cobb, you're definitely doing something wrong in cash games. So
yeah, good luck winning without either one.
Right.
Here's a value play off the bat, and we saw Sammy Watkins, obviously, in case you didn't know, still hasn't practiced this week. It looks like he's questionable, but he looks like he's on the wrong side of questionable. We know everybody hates the questionable tag, but if he's still not practicing as of Thursday, is the likelihood that he plays, and even if he does play, maybe he's not even going to be close to 100%. So certainly someone going to pick up the slack. Percy Harvin going to be a guy that people look at, but also Robert Woods is a guy who has done well in these situations before. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, if there's a secondary worse than the 49ers this year, it's the Giants. They're giving up the most passing yards a game of any team so far this season. So one of the higher totals, despite only being 46, not a high-scoring week expected for once. So Robert Woods at his price tag could certainly be a nice value play for you here.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen him be pretty effective at a minimum price in the past when he's filled in for different guys for the Bills. I mean, he's been there, I want to say 4 years now, as basically their third/fourth receiver, depending on who's healthy and stuff at the time. He's a decent PPR option. Not a guy I'm super excited about playing in GPPs, but as far as cash games go, I think he's a pretty good bet to make the value he needs at 3,100 on DraftKings. Not quite as good a play on FanDuel where the minimum's higher, and it's not PPR, but I still feel pretty decent about that cash game wise.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, with that low price tag, I mean, you don't need to have a huge performance. You just need to have a little bit of volume, which you should see. Next up, you got Alan Hearns here for the Jacksonville. And Jacksonville obviously has used Alan Hearns as the deep threat before. Not a huge volume guy, but he's seen a decent amount of targets so far this year. And he's still cheap. Had that late touchdown catch last week.
Yep.
Looked like he was going to throw up a dud in the couple of GPPs I had him in. And, did well by catching that late touchdown. And he's been a tough cover deep, especially with multiple options now. You've got Allen Robinson out there as well. And Blake Bortles hasn't looked terrible. Obviously, last week was a debacle. But, I mean, when your defense is giving up 51 points, your chances of hanging with Tom Brady aren't very good. So Allen Hearns is going to be a sneaky play once again here.
Yeah, definitely. Teams that have faced Indianapolis so far this season, the guy that hasn't been covered by Vontae Davis, which I almost fully expect to be Allen Robinson on Sunday, has gone off. And like you mentioned with Hearns, last week was a little tough. He caught that, I think it was a 59-yard touchdown right at the end of the game there that was basically his entire stat line for the day. But prior to that, he racked up 5 and 4 catches. He scored double-digit PPR points in every game so far this season. Obviously, the last one buoyed by that long touchdown. But he's a guy I'm going to assume is getting probably 7-8 targets in this game. Has a good chance to rack up 4 or 5 catches. And like you mentioned, he's been a really consistently effective deep threat for them over the past 2 seasons. And like we saw with that touchdown last week, I mean, he can make up points really fast. And this is likely to be a pretty high-scoring game. I know that the Jaguars are, 19-point team total right now? But it's a pretty high overall 48 against Indy. I'm not in love with the fact that they have a 19 team total, but it seems unlikely that they aren't going to be throwing the whole game based on the spread in this game. So, I mean, even if they're not scoring points, he should be racking up targets, and that's about all you can ask for from a guy this cheap.
Yeah, and that's a great point about the Vontae Davis thing. I mean, he's the one corner in the league that I won't ever play anybody against if they're going to be matched up against him. So that's a good call. And then kind of mentioned Percy Harvin earlier. Like we said, doesn't look like Sammy Watkins is likely to play this weekend, and even if he does, not going to be 100%. So Percy Harvin, a guy, already had one really big week this year, week 1. He saw a decent amount of targets. He caught a long touchdown pass. I think it was a 51-yarder from Tyrod Taylor. So Tyrod Taylor, once again, going to be a popular cash game option for some people, and it's not a bad idea to go ahead and pair him with a guy like Percy Harvin, who's got a decent price tag on both sides, and going to take on a lot bigger role this week with either way. Even if Sammy Watkins goes, he's going to take on a bigger role this week.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Harvin has been pretty solid. I think he caught 7 of 8 targets last week. Looked good in week 1, catching a touchdown. I mean, he's clearly their number 1 receiver. Not that that's meant a ton for Sammy Watkins so far this year, but they find a way to get him the ball. He's rushed it 4 times already this year, so you don't really have to worry about his touches, I don't think. I mean, he's going to get somewhere around 10 looks, 10 touches, something like that in this game. It's just going to depend what he does with them. And the Giants' defense has, frankly, just not been very good at tackling people in space. So, I mean, there's a good chance there's a long gainer coming here with obviously potential for a touchdown due to that. Not a guy I'm super excited about, but his price is so low everywhere that it's kind of hard to argue with his upside.
Yeah, it's certainly a guy that kind of stands out with that price tag. And
he's priced that I think you can get some profit on that price in cash games, and obviously the upside is massive in GPPs. So he's going to be a really popular GPP play for me, where I don't think I'll use him in cash games just because of these cheaper guys that seem to be more consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan Matthews, another guy you've got mentioned here, is a GPP play for the Eagles, and we know the whole story with the Eagles. First couple weeks, big hype. Lots of us let down. Anyone who says they weren't burned by that either wasn't trying or is lying. So Jordan Matthews he's still a freak athlete in a potentially explosive offense that looked a lot better last week in the running game. As soon as DeMarco Murray didn't play, all of a sudden this offense looked good. Obviously, that's anecdotal. That doesn't actually mean much. But either way, I mean, with an established run game, obviously it opens up a lot more for the offense. And Jordan Matthews, the guy, it's still due to the recency bias. A lot of people down on him because of the offense itself just not being very good. And Sam Bradford's been terrible throwing the ball down the field. So maybe they get creative with him this week, get him involved in the short passing game because, he's an elusive pass catcher and when you get him out in space. So you don't have to throw the ball deep for him to produce.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably the best thing about him. We got to be a little bit worried about this storm, but it looks like it's going to come in after the game now. So it might be a little bit windy and rainy, but if anything, that probably helps Matthews playing out of the slot as he's a big part of the short passing game for the Eagles. The real question is what happens with their running game. If they run as well as they did last week and have a nice lead on Washington like Vegas is projecting, we could see another 35 rushes from them where they don't throw it a ton, and that's where Matthews is going to struggle. If they're out there throwing it 40 times, Matthews is going to have a nice game. We saw that each of the first 2 weeks. They struggled terribly in week 2, and he still racked up 85 yards and a touchdown on 6 catches. So if they are passing the ball, I have no concerns about him. My one concern would be they get up 14-0 and just run the ball 35 times again and don't really need Sam Bradford to do anything in it on a day where it's going to be a little bit windy and rainy. So he's definitely a GPP play for me, but where his price is at, I feel awfully good about the upside that comes with it.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people get scared off by the wind, myself included sometimes. Like last week, we heard the reports about Bengals and Ravens game with gusting winds, and then we saw Steve Smith and A.J. Green combined for about 400 yards, just the two of them. So certainly, if game flow dictates, he could certainly still have a big game. Dante Moncrief, another guy, got his... a late touchdown to kind of save his week last week. Was a guy that a lot of people were hate tweeting in about the third quarter there. But Andrew Luck has been incredible in the fourth quarter. Not great before that, but 29-point team total against Jacksonville, a team that has, gave up 51 points last week. And certainly this isn't the Patriots, but still a big game for the Colts as they try to get back into this division here. And, it's another game that they should win and they need to win. And I think Andrew Luck definitely needs this one for his confidence, too.
Yeah, definitely. Someone on this Colts offense is just going to go crazy at some point. We saw Gore start to get going last week. Moncrief's been the only solid one so far. If Luck gets it going, we're going to see Moncrief look better. We're going to see T.Y. Hilton look better. We're going to see Andre Johnson look better. Then that's going to make everyone better in turn. So, I still have confidence in Andrew Luck that he can make this a great offense. So, Moncrief is just still too cheap for the guy that actually has been producing for them. He's still cheaper than Andre Johnson, I think. He's definitely still cheaper than T.Y. Hilton. 5,000 is just really, really cheap for a guy that's leading an explosive offense in targets.
Yeah, absolutely. And then speaking of an explosive offense, your last guy here, Ty Montgomery, caught a touchdown pass, didn't see a ton of volume or a ton of work, but this is still a team that's going to just be throwing the ball all over the field against this terrible San Francisco secondary. And he's the guy that's going to see the bump from Devontae Adams not playing this weekend. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers must trust him some. He got a red zone look last week. That's the key thing in this Packers offense. If you're a wide receiver that gets red zone looks and you produce in those red zone looks, then you get Aaron Rodgers confidence because we know with Aaron Rodgers if things are going well with him and with you, then you're certainly in line. But if you get on his bad side, then he's just going to force the ball into everybody else.
Yeah, definitely. The Packers played 3 wide receivers on almost 90% of the plays last week. They're down Andrew Corliss now, who I believe they put on IR, so that leaves them with really one tight end. He's probably going to play close to 90% of the plays this week. He's played well ahead of Jeff Janis so far. Like you said, the volume of targets wasn't really there, but it's definitely a comfort thing with Rodgers. James Jones really isn't very good anymore, but Rodgers is comfortable with him, so he sees the targets. At some point, people are going to do a better job of covering James Jones, especially with him being the number 2 option in the offense right now. And obviously, teams are already shading coverage toward Randall Cobb because of how great he's been, and he's clearly the best player on their offense. So Montgomery's going to have his chances. I wanted to include him as a value play, but I didn't feel good enough about the targets to really want him in cash games until we see how he's utilized this week and confirm that Devontae Adams is out, even though it looks pretty likely at this point. But for 3,000, there's so much profit potential there. If he catches 1 touchdown, he's good. If he catches 3 passes for 75 yards, he's good. So, at an absolute minimum price at wide receiver and one of the best offenses, it's pretty tough to argue with.
Yeah, very small risk involved there. All right, that's going to wrap things up for us for the Wide Receiver Podcast. Check us out on Twitter at DF Cafe. Check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.